this is a great time to make sure that you've printed out your HMAC for the landing and loading towards a kick phase of a kick. I just want to take you through football performance. This will take us through several sections, and the reason that I want you to sort of see this is just to get an idea of our application of the techniques and skills we teach. So the first thing here is we have our fictional footballer. Now, our fictional footballer, the reason we show them this is because if you ask someone if they want to be aerobically better at sprinting, better at turning, better at jumping, better at holding off, better at ball striking, they'll say they want to be the best at all those things. And the problem you have from our side of that is that we can't just fit all that training into one space. Every year, sort of around January, February time, you'll see a professional football team fall into this trap where they'll be playing a certain style, decide that they're not quick enough or strong enough, and so they'll introduce more training for that, and they won't take away some of the training that they're already doing. They'll just add in more volume, and then you'll just see their injuries increase, and normally that'll take them off the championship pace, or that'll be the thing that takes them down. And so it's important for us to manage the expectation of the footballer in front of us. We also need to manage what they need to get from their sport and their team, and what their coach wants to get from them as an individual player. And then we have to make some tactical decisions on top. And this is just an example of our fictional player. We're going to look at it as we go through and see, well, what could we do for someone who played football? We still think that aerobic training is the thing, in terms of you've got to get around a field for the full 90. Previously, we've been shy on the aerobic training and said it's all about strength, and with strength will come aerobic. But the reality is that's not reality. And so the player has to feel fit and has to put in the yards to get their aerobic fitness up. They have to have the ability to sprint within that. They have to have the ability to turn within that, jump, hold players off, strike the ball, tackle, head. There's a whole range of things they need to be able to do, all while under this sort of aerobic ability. And so that's what we need to look at. So this is our requirement for Footballer X, but really it's just to show you that in a random way you can only fit so much into this training session. So if we want to build a specific performance goal, and we're going to look at the performance goal of getting better power through a strike. So we want better power with less backlift, so less motion, more power. So the first thing you've got to do is identify that performance goal, and so obviously we have. Then we HMAC the movement. Now, this is not going to be a comprehensive course on how to HMAC, because there's just too much to it to fit it all in one place. But you will have the HMAC forms printed in front of you, and I will run you through a full HMAC. And then I'd suggest take out the big chunks of what you see there and how it works. And then also get yourself some good motion analysis equipment, and perhaps use this system if you can sort of self-teach it, or if you've not done the specialist performance or the specialist therapy, jump on there and spend some time learning how to assess any kind of move. What we'll do in the forums is we'll respond with HMACs if people put videos up there. So if you put a video up and say, I want this player's come to me, they want to produce this skill, we'll HMAC it and show you some techniques and things on the back of it. There's so much you could do with this that it's just impossible to be comprehensive. So the idea is to give you the skill of seeing it, to help you get through it, and to encourage you to go away and learn one of our base courses if you haven't, just to give you that ability to be able to see every motion in that detail. The people who really get it and who really practice the HMAC, they're the people that can do it without the HMAC form. And so, and I want to take you through it, and I will talk you through it, but this is important. And there's some quite important things come out of this, certainly with the kick and what people tend to do in terms of techniques to improve the kick. So once you have the kick sorted and laid out, then you start to look at, well, what's the CSS of this movement? And so how do I make this movement as perfect as I can for the client in their conditions? And then once I've got that from fresh, can I think of a way of fatiguing them in a similar way to a game? And then once I've done that, can I train that compensation away? And so if they've got one, when they're playing a kick under fatigue, you compare it with a fresh kick. You don't compare it for symmetry or ideal kick, just with the fresh good kick that they had. And then you see if you can help them find some movements, some strengthening movements or range movements or sequencing movements to get them to kick in the same way as they did on the first kick. And that's the whole idea behind this, that we're trying to keep that consistency. And certainly in football, consistency is key to keeping your place. It's good to have the skills, but it's better to be able to consistently run in the right place, is consistently make space, close down space, and know that when you receive the ball, you can make the pass, make the long kick, and stay pretty much injury free for the whole time, in order to allow you to then jump onto the, playing every game and staying in a side for longer and being able to play for longer in your career. And you can feasibly add years to a player's career just by trying to find out what their fatigue pattern is, and then trying to find them some systems to use when they're fatigued that will help them get back to moving in a sequence they want. And them then playing through that is ultimately the most functional training you could possibly do for them, the most functional exercise you could give them. And as long as it doesn't cause them to play beyond what they're able and become injured, then you've done a great job. So let's have a look at the kick. So this is we're going to say this is our textbook ball strike from our coach. Now we can argue whether it is or it isn't, but the point is that we just want something to hang our hat on in terms of what we expect from our sequence. And so this is Drew, who we use later in the course as an example of what we want to get, how we want to train a footballer. And Drew's a good guy. He's one of our faster sort of leaders in performance, and he looks after football with his business partner Jake, and they run a business called Surpass, which is part of the reason that this course exists. And so here you see the strike, and what we're going to look at is really what's happening on the left. So it's landing that foot, and how that foot, which appears to get behind, ends up behind the pelvis, and the result will be that kick follow through. And so we just look at it from the side as well. So now we want to have a look at, well, what are the muscles doing there? This is just to give you an idea of how that spring loading happens. So you've got an idea of, look, this is what it'll look like bone by bone. So these are the muscles reacting when we fill that component of the HMAC in. And I'm going to talk you through. This is already filled in. You already have it filled in. I'm going to talk you through where we got each part from. And then the significance of that to the kick itself. If you're attending one of the live courses, then you'll run through one of these for another technique. So let's go straight in there. This is important. This is where I need you to remember, print off your HMAC, and then listen to how it's filled in, and then you can sort of see it. I really don't like to keep saying get on the specialist in functional performance, get on the specialist in functional therapy, and I'm not saying that you need that. I'm saying that if you really like this HMAC form and you can see it being benefit to you, then you can use it. I'm not saying it's a necessity. We're not about pushing buy this course to learn why to buy the next course. Just in this scenario, this is such a specialist skill. We just don't have the time to take you through it. So these are the 6 questions I'm going to be asking as I look at the movement. I'm going to be looking at a movement. It's going to be over a number of seconds. So the form you're going to see is going to be about the foot landing and everything happening up to the point before all the bones have changed direction and moved from loading in the kick to exploding out the kick. And so the questions I ask, I want to know where the bone's travelling in terms of, is it travelling forward or back? So I'm not interested in its rotation. I'm just interested in, did it get forward or back? Did it get left or right? And did it go up or down? And then I'm interested in, how did it rotate around its own axis? So did it rotate anterior or posterior? Did it tilt to the left or the right? And did it rotate to the left or the right? Now, some of these terms are not the terms used in sort of a scientific biomechanical terminology, and so we talk about bones as when they're traveling as relating to where they are in space. So as if you've got the bone next to a piece of white paper and you've stuck in 3 pens and it draws on the paper the direction it's travelled to and from, and you'd be describing the line going forward, down and across, or whatever it did. And when we talk about rotating around an axis, a lot of the time that's spoken about as left tilt and right tilt would be described as right laterally flexing or left laterally flexing, and right rotate and left rotate will be more commonly described as medial or lateral. But we're trying to build a form that gives you the ability to go hands-on, to see the motion and develop exercises and skills around the motion. So this is not something you want to be writing in a scientific paper, not with this terminology anyway. So once we've described how the bones move, then that gives us an idea of what the joints might be feeling. And so we start talking about, well, what is a joint feeling? So we talk about what's the joint feeling in the sagittal plane. So, for example, if this was the hip, we'd be asking, is the hip feeling flexing or extending? And that's the motion of, not the position of. So you could be partially flexed and flex some more and be flexing, but you wouldn't say you started flexed and end up more flexed. You'd say you were flexing. You could be fully extended and move to less fully extended and still be flexing, even though you're in an extended position. And so we're interested in the movement, and that's because the muscles associated with the joint will be interested in the movement. If they could think, obviously muscles can't think, but in terms of how they respond, they'll respond to movement rather than respond to position. We then want to know, well, what caused that? So we're looking mainly at rotation here. So what were the bones doing in comparison with each other in terms of rotation? So were they rotating the same way? Was proximal rotating the same way as distal but faster? Was distal rotating the same way as proximal but faster? Were they rotating in opposite directions? And then once we've done this, we need to do this across all 3 planes at the joint. And that will give us a combination that will say, well, this joint is feeling these combinations of movements. And then that will eventually take us on to the muscles, and then we can say, well, which muscles are responding. So just while I was saying that, here's the kick from multiple angles, and we're interested in that landing. So if I just drag Drew back to here, look, we're interested in from there to there. So from there to there. And then just as that leg starts, that right leg starts to come through, you know, we're about done. And so we'll show you what that looks like. And then obviously it goes through to this. And if you see that, that's the video you saw earlier when you were listening to the muscle function lecture, if you're listening in order. So that's our movement. So we need to go to this form and just say, right, well, how does this form work? And so down the left hand side, we've got everything that's happening in the foot and ankle all the way up to the hip. So this goes to the knee, then let's come by there, look, we go into the hip, and then we go across the right hip and down to the right foot, and then we have a look at the spine, and then we finish off what's happening in the shoulder. And then when you bring that together, that's all describing quite a short motion. But it's that load that's going to set up the kick. And so we'd say in this kick, as long as you've got the range of motion to get through the kick on the end range, then the most important thing to do is make sure the load of the kick's correct. And so that's why we focused on this. That's not to say that you have to focus on the same part of the movement, and it would depend on the player. What we really want to know is, once you've filled this form in, can you grab the information out you need to build the techniques required to help your player get better? So if we look at this, and I'll talk you through here, and then we'll go back to the form. So if you look, the first thing to hit the floor on the left leg is the calcaneus, and so the heel struck the floor, and then the left foot, it sort of loads, but it's loading off on an angle. And then you can see that once the foot's on the floor, there's a slight bend in the knee, a slight movement of the pelvis, and then you can see it at that point of landing, there's also the right leg is starting to get its load to do its movement through. If you look up at the spine's then reacting to this, and you look up at the shoulders, there's some reacting to that as well. And so although the major mover there is sort of the left foot initially and then the right, what we're interested in, well, what are the reactions across the rest of the body that allow this kick to happen? And that's what we need to sort of focus on. So I'll just play it through again. And that's the kind of, this is what we want you to get used to. And that's why it's good to get some motion software such as Kinesio Capture. So if we just move on, so this is our left foot. So the left calcaneus, we're saying, goes forward, it travels right, and it travels down. Now we've put here that it right tilts, so it rotates anterior, so the knee looks like it's coming forward. We put that it right tilts and left rotates, and so if we just nip back to that, so what we're saying is it's really left tilted here, and then as it lands less left tilted as it hits the floor, and so that's our right tilt. So it's from left tilted to less left tilted is our right tilt, and that's how that you sort of start to get the motions happen. So the talus is a bone that sits above the calcaneus. You can see what it does by looking at what the tib fib's doing and what the calcaneus is doing. Kind of gives you a clue. Usually they're doing the same. It's doing the same thing as their tib fib, and so it's just like an extension but not connected. So what we've got here is we're saying it's going forward, down, forward, right, and down, anterior, right tilting but right rotating. And what we're saying is, as the calcaneus right tilts, it starts to rotate off to the left. And so the platform that's left is sort of table-like, and it's a little bit like when you whip the tablecloth from underneath the plates. The plates travel the opposite direction to the tablecloth. Well, that's kind of what we think happens in the transverse plane. And so we would say it's right rotating, and right rotating at quite some pace. And so we say the end result would be that the subtalar joint is feeling dorsiflexing, where you've got the proximal traveling faster than the distal. So the calcaneus hit the floor, you're starting to get into the knee coming over, and that drives the talus to go second after the tibia. But because the calcaneus has stopped, the talus is going to be moving quicker. So we'd say that it's dorsiflexing. Probably truly you'd say it's plantar then dorsi. It would be a lack of dorsiflexing that would cost you the technique, and so that's kind of our focus. In the frontal plane, that tip would cause a stretch on the inside of the ankle, and that's an everting movement. And so we'd say that the subtalar joint will be feeling everting because the calcaneus is moving away from the talus, and so that would be the stretch. We'd say that would be distal faster than proximal. And then we would say that we would be abducting in opposite directions because the calcaneus is rotating out, and so that external rotation looking movement is called abduction at the foot. It's left rotating, the talus is shooting down and right rotating, so that's like an opposite directions rotation, and so that's where we get that motion from. Now moving forward to look at the front of the foot versus the rear of the foot, the forefoot's also travelling forward, right and down, but as soon as that front foot hits the floor, so we've moved slightly on this. So now if we look at Drew, and let's look at him from the side, what we're saying here is that heel's hit the floor, and now the toes hit the floor, and that's where you can see everything coming over. And so this foot is really tightly compact. And so because it's tightly compact, in the sagittal plane and in the transverse plane, we're going to presume that the movement of the bones in the rear of the foot will influence the bones in the front of the foot to move in a position sort of that's opposite. And so in the frontal plane you've got that arch, and so we say in the frontal plane it's probably the distal bone, so the forefoot is being driven by the rear foot. So here we would say that what we'd expect is an opposite directions dorsiflexion, an inversion, which is the foot will look like it's everting and flattening to the floor, but it'll be an inversion relatively because the forefoot will be taking longer to get down than the rear foot, and abduction, and that would be where the toes are starting to spread and where you're starting to see a distance. Really we'll be talking about a distance between the talus and the navicular, and so that's where you'd see that spread. In terms of the muscles reacting there, we'll have some reaction from the gastroc initially, and that would start to slow down as soon as there was a knee bend, definitely from the soleus, definitely from the posterior tib, and then the perineals will be the main thing with the sort of fascia that sits under the foot, with the main thing sort of resisting that mid-tarsal movement. We then start to work up the chain, and we say, well, we know what the talus is doing, and that's going to drive the tib fib. And so the tib fib's going to go forward, right, down, anterior, right tilt, right rotate, because that's what's being driven by the talus. So it's a knock-on effect. And so there you're going to see dorsiflexing, driven by just the pure height of the tib fib rotating over the top of the talus. So that would be proximal faster. You're going to be everting, and again that's that drop from the talus that pulls away from the tibia, and that will be distally driven. And then here we believe you'd be adducting, or what we call internally rotating, as the tibia rotates in because it's been driven by the talus, and so the talus goes first, and that drives the tib, and that's the internal rotation, which we call adduction. And again, it's the same muscles that are involved, all the muscles that slow down sort of that pronating foot. So we go up to the knee, and we have a look what the femur's doing. So the femur's got an interesting role here, because it's kind of following on from the tibia. So if it kept going the same way as the tibia, then obviously we'd lose our play on the floor potentially. So it's kind of sat there, but in that sagittal plane, it's allowing the centre of gravity to sit back to allow that kick. And so if we move on here, look, it's travelling forward, right and down, but it's rotating posteriorly, and it's tilting over to the left as the hip comes across, and it's rotating to the right because it's being driven by the tib fib. So if we have a look at that again, you bring it back, as we land there, you see that the pelvis here is just coming across, and it's quite hard, it's quite subtle, but the pelvis is starting to right tilt as we start to get some power through this foot. And so we're looking at the knee flexing in opposite directions, which is good to decelerate that power forward. opposite directions is the most powerful way of slowing down a movement. There's abducting happening at the knee as you as the femur tilts over to that left, and there's internal rotating happening at that knee as the tib fib drives in. So that kind of takes us up to talking about the left hip, which is doing the support role for this kick, and then we'll take us down to the right hip through to the right foot.